When I walked into that courtroom, you could hear a pin drop. The judge was already seated, flipping through her papers, when she looked up and froze. "Mrs. McConnell," she said slowly, almost whispering, "why are you here?" The lawyers glanced around. Stephanie shifted in her seat, trying not to smile too wide. She had that kind of grin that told you she believed the whole thing was already over. My hands were steady as I walked toward the front. I carried nothing fancy, just a manila envelope pressed against my chest. It wasn't heavy, but I could feel the weight of every sleepless night inside it. I looked at the judge and said quietly, "I'm here to make sure the truth is spoken, Your Honor." The courtroom fell silent. Eddie wouldn't even look at me. My son sat beside Stephanie, his shoulders slumped, eyes empty. For a second, I wondered how we got to this point. My own child sitting across from me in a courtroom, his wife smirking like she'd already buried me. The judge adjusted her glasses. "Very well, Mrs. McConnell. Please take a seat." As I sat down, Stephanie leaned toward her lawyer, whispering something that made her laugh under her breath. It was a sound I'd come to know too well, the sound of someone who thought they'd won. I looked down at my envelope. Inside were copies of property deeds, bank statements, and one printed email that could change everything. I didn't come to fight. I came to tell the truth. If someone had told me 6 months ago that I'd be back in a courtroom, I would have laughed. I thought my days of dealing with lawyers and judges were long behind me. I had my garden, my church ladies group, and my peaceful little house in Plano. Life had finally slowed down, just like I wanted. But when someone tries to rewrite your family's story, you don't sit quiet, you show up. You show up, even if it means sitting across from your own child. I took a deep breath and stared straight ahead as the bailiff called the case. The matter of McConnell versus McConnell property division hearing. Those words didn't even sound real. McConnell versus McConnell. I'd carried that name for 42 years, and now it sounded like a fight. The judge began reading through the case summary. Stephanie sat tall, her chin lifted like she owned the air around her. Every few seconds, she reached over to touch Eddie's arm, as if she still had him wrapped around her finger. I thought about all the little moments that led us here. The first time I met her, the warnings I ignored, the things I saw but didn't want to believe. My husband, God rest his soul, would have known better. He always said, "Yolanda, when people show you who they are, don't argue, just remember." But I wanted to believe my son was happy. I wanted to believe Stephanie cared about him, even if she didn't care much for me. Now, sitting there, I realized how blind I'd been. The judge's voice broke through my thoughts. "Mrs. McConnell, you've requested to speak as an interested party to the estate matter. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," I replied. Stephanie turned toward me, her smile thin and sharp. "With all due respect," she said, "I don't understand why my husband's mother is even here. This case is between me and Eddie." Her lawyer nodded, backing her up. "Your Honor, Mrs. McConnell isn't a party to the property. She's simply here to observe." The judge raised an eyebrow. "We'll see about that." Then she looked at me again. "Go ahead, Mrs. McConnell. You may speak when the time comes." I nodded and kept quiet. My moment would come soon enough. From the corner of my eye, I could see Eddie staring down at his hands, twisting his wedding band around his finger. That ring used to mean something. Now it just looked heavy on him, like it didn't belong anymore. I wanted to reach out, but this wasn't the time. There was too much at stake. I thought about the house, the one my husband helped Eddie build 10 years ago. Every piece of wood, every nail carried a bit of our family's history. That house was more than property. It was the place where my grandchildren were supposed to grow up, the home where birthdays and Thanksgivings would be held. Now, I was sitting in a courtroom, about to watch it become part of a divorce settlement I never saw coming. The clerk handed a few documents to the judge, and the hearing began. Stephanie's lawyer started speaking first, confident, smooth, rehearsed. He described Stephanie as a devoted wife who had supported her husband through financial hardship, and therefore was entitled to equitable division. I almost laughed. Stephanie had supported Eddie. All right, supported herself right into his accounts. When the lawyer finished, Stephanie reached over to squeeze Eddie's hand, pretending to be emotional. The judge nodded, then turned toward Eddie's attorney. That's when I noticed Eddie's lawyer looked nervous. Too nervous, like someone who'd already been cornered. I leaned back and took a quiet breath. They didn't know I'd come prepared. I wasn't here out of pride or spite. I was here because silence had gone too far. If you let people tell lies long enough, they start to sound like the truth. I wasn't about to let that happen. The judge called a short recess, and everyone began to shuffle papers. Stephanie leaned close to her lawyer again. I couldn't hear what she said, but I saw the smile on her lips. That same smile haunted me for weeks. It started the day she told me I wasn't welcome at my own son's house. I stared at her from across the courtroom, and for a split second, our eyes met. Hers were cold, almost proud. I held her gaze, calm as ever, then looked back at the judge's bench. Inside my envelope was the truth, and before this day was over, everyone in that courtroom, the judge, the lawyers, even my son, would know exactly why I was there. Because this wasn't just about property. It was about respect. And respect, once taken, doesn't come back easily. That night, the house was quiet. The kind of quiet that only comes when you've lived alone long enough to notice every small sound. The fridge humming, the clock ticking, the neighbor's dog barking twice before it settled down. I was washing dishes when the phone rang. It was almost 9 o'clock, and I remember thinking, who'd call this late? When I picked up, I heard Eddie's voice. Hey, Mom. I smiled right away. Well, look who remembered his mother. He chuckled, but there was something different in his tone. Yeah, sorry. Been a busy week. Busy's good, I said. Means life's moving. There was a pause. I heard him breathe, then clear his throat. Listen, Mom. Steph thinks maybe we should have a little space for a while. To figure out our own rhythm. I stood still, the dish towel dripping onto the floor. Space. Yeah, he said softly. It's nothing personal. She just feels like sometimes, well, you come around a lot, and she wants to make our house feel like ours. I could feel my heart drop, but I forced a little laugh. Oh, I see. Well, I guess newlyweds need their privacy. Yeah, he said quickly, sounding relieved that I didn't argue. You get it. I do. I lied. If that makes her happy, I'll give you some space. He thanked me, said goodnight, and hung up. I stood there for a long time, holding that silent phone. I wanted to believe it was just a young couple trying to adjust, but something about the way he said, Steph thinks, stayed with me. It wasn't we think. It was Steph thinks. After my husband died 8 years ago, it had been just me and Eddie. We didn't have much, but we got by. I worked part-time at the library back then, kept the house running, and Eddie picked up tech jobs to help with bills. We were a team. He was kind, loyal, and patient, just like his father. I used to tell people, if every son were like Eddie, the world would have fewer lonely mothers. When he met Stephanie, I wanted to be happy for him. She was from Austin, smart, confident, always dressed like she was on her way to a meeting. The first time I met her, she brought me a box of fancy chocolates and called me Mrs. McConnell like I was a stranger. I remember thinking, she's polite, but not warm. Still, I tried. I really did. When Eddie brought her over for dinner, I made her favorite meal, chicken parmesan, she said. I set the good plates, the ones with blue rims, and lit candles even though it was just the three of us. Halfway through the meal, She mentioned how small my kitchen was. "It's cute," she said, smiling just enough to make it sound polite but not kind. "Eddie told me your house is paid off, right? That's nice. We're still working on ours." It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. Like she was already comparing, measuring. After that dinner, she didn't visit often. She'd send Eddie alone and say she had errands or work calls. I didn't push. I told myself it was normal. Young people have their own lives. A few months later, Eddie called to say they were having a small get-together, just family and close friends. I was excited. I even baked a pie. But when I called to ask what time I should come, Stephanie answered and said, "Oh, Yolanda, I'm so sorry. We were going to invite you, but it's mostly our friends from work. You probably wouldn't know anyone." She laughed lightly, like it wasn't a big deal. I told her not to worry about it, but after we hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at that pie for a long time. I ended up giving it to my neighbor, Ruth. She asked, "You all right, Yolanda? You look tired." I smiled and told her I was fine. That's what women my age do. We say we're fine, even when we're breaking a little inside. Weeks passed. I called Eddie less, figuring he needed space. I didn't want to be that mother, the one who meddles. But silence has a way of getting loud. One Sunday afternoon, I drove by Eddie's house. I wasn't planning to stop. I just wanted to see it. The yard looked different, trimmed too neat, almost cold. The curtains were new, Stephanie's style. I parked down the street and sat there, telling myself I was just out for a drive. But then I saw them, Eddie and Stephanie unloading boxes from their car. She was pointing, directing him where to put things, and he moved like a man who didn't want to argue. It wasn't my place to interfere, but I felt a chill in my chest. Something had shifted. Later that night, I called him. No answer. I tried again the next day. Still nothing. Then, a week later, I saw a for sale flyer on the neighborhood bulletin board. It was for a house just like Eddie's. Same model, same layout. The price was high. Too high. I thought about Stephanie's job. She worked part-time at a design studio, nothing that could buy a home like that. And Eddie wasn't making that kind of money either. I didn't say anything, but a seed of worry planted itself in my stomach and refused to leave. Every night, I walked past the empty side of my bed and thought of my husband. He would have known what to say. He always did. When he was alive, he and Eddie were close. They built that house together, nail by nail. After he passed, Eddie promised me he'd keep it forever, said it was the last piece of his dad he had left. Now, it felt like that promise was fading away, piece by piece. I wanted to pick up the phone and call Eddie, tell him what I saw, tell him that something about Stephanie didn't sit right. But I could still hear his voice from that night. "Steph thinks we need space." So I stayed quiet. It's funny how love can make you patient in all the wrong ways. You tell yourself you're waiting for things to get better, but really, you're just hoping you're wrong. That phone call, that one simple, polite conversation, changed everything. It was the first time I realized that love can't always protect you from distance. Sometimes it creates it. I wish I had known that then, because that one call was the start of everything that would lead me to that courtroom. The lies, the papers, and the moment the judge looked me in the eye and said, "Why are you here?" But before any of that happened, there were signs. Small ones. The kind you only see clearly when it's too late. And it all began with what I chose to ignore. A few weeks passed after that phone call, and I tried to keep myself busy. I told myself they just needed time. Couples go through growing pains, right? That's what I kept repeating. I went to my church meetings, walked with my neighbor Ruth in the mornings, and pretended everything was fine. But no matter how many errands I ran, my mind always went back to Eddie. Mothers know when something isn't right. We can feel it long before the rest of the world notices. One afternoon, I was driving through Eddie's neighborhood on my way to the grocery store. I wasn't planning to stop, but habit led me down his street. As I turned the corner, I slowed down. There was a moving truck in front of his house. Two men were loading boxes and what looked like heavy wooden shelves. Then I saw it, my husband's old workbench. The one he built himself from oak. The one he used every weekend. He had carved both our initials into one side. I parked across the street and got out. "Excuse me," I called to one of the movers. "Where are you taking those?" He shrugged. "Just following instructions, ma'am." Said it's going to storage. I looked up, and there was Stephanie standing on the porch, arms crossed, wearing sunglasses though it wasn't sunny. "Yolanda," she said, her voice sugary sweet. "Didn't expect to see you here." I nodded slowly. "Those are my husband's tools." She tilted her head, pretending to think. "Oh, right. Eddie thought you didn't need them anymore. We're doing some cleaning and making space. You know how clutter piles up?" Clutter. That's what she called his tools. The very things that built their house. I didn't argue. I just said, "Tell Eddie I stopped by." As I turned to leave, I glanced at the side yard. The rose bushes my husband planted the spring before he died were almost brown. Leaves gone, soil cracked. I had told Eddie once that those roses were his father's way of staying close. They used to bloom deep, red, every summer. Now, they looked like they were gasping for air. My husband always said, "Roses tell you what kind of home you've built. If they bloom, you're doing something right." Standing there, I knew something was wrong. Not just with the roses, with everything. When I got home, I tried calling Eddie. Straight to voicemail. I left a message. "Hi, sweetheart, just checking in. Call me when you get a minute." He didn't call back. Days went by, then weeks. The silence stretched longer than it ever had before. I told myself he was busy, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like distance, planned distance. I stopped by the post office to drop off a letter one morning, and the clerk, Mrs. Lane, waved me over. "Yolanda, honey, you still getting your mail sent to Eddie's?" I frowned. "No, why?" She lowered her voice. "Well, I noticed the mortgage and bank envelopes that used to come here for him are going to a different address now. Maybe his wife changed it." My heart sank. "Oh, I see." I thanked her and left, but I couldn't shake that feeling. Stephanie was moving things, not just in the house, but in his life. I decided to check on Eddie's house again the next Sunday after church. The lawn looked perfect, like something from a magazine, but it didn't feel like him. Everything that once had his touch was gone. His old truck wasn't in the driveway. The porch light he installed himself was replaced with a sleek, new one that didn't suit the place at all. I rang the bell, half hoping he'd answer. Stephanie opened the door. "Oh," she said, surprised but not happy to see me. "Eddie's out." "I won't stay long," I said. Just wanted to drop off his favorite casserole. She smiled like she was humoring a child. "That's sweet. I'll make sure he gets it." I hesitated, then asked softly, "Is he doing okay? He hasn't called lately." She shrugged. "He's just tired. Work's been stressful. He's trying to be the provider, you know? He'll call when he has time." Her words sounded rehearsed. From behind her, I could see Eddie's framed photos on the hallway shelf. Except one was missing, the picture of him and his dad fishing when he was 12, the one he used to keep by the door. When I pointed toward the empty spot, Stephanie noticed and quickly said, "Oh, that? I'm rearranging things." The frames didn't match. I just nodded. "Of course." On the drive home, I cried. Not loud, just quiet tears that come when you realize you're losing someone without a fight. A few days later, Eddie finally called. His voice was strained, tired. "Hey, Mom," he said softly. "Sorry I've been MIA. Things are crazy at work. I'm fine, really. Are you sure? I asked. You don't sound fine. He chuckled weakly. Just tired. Steph's helping me keep things organized. She's better at that kind of stuff. There it was again, her name in every sentence. She was everywhere, making decisions, speaking for him, managing him like he couldn't handle his own life. Don't let work or anyone else wear you down, I said gently. I won't, Mom. I promise. But I could tell he was lying. The next time I saw him, it was at the grocery store parking lot. He looked thinner. The dark circles under his eyes said more than words could. When he hugged me, he felt smaller somehow, lighter, but not in a good way. How are you holding up? I asked. He smiled faintly. I'm fine. Just trying to keep up. Behind him, Stephanie was loading bags into the car. She didn't wave. As he walked away, I noticed how he glanced at her before every step, like he needed silent permission. That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, staring at the stars. I kept replaying every conversation in my head, every glance, every missing detail. The rose bushes, the mail, the missing photo, the quiet tone in his voice. I tried to convince myself that maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe I was just old-fashioned, as Stephanie once called me. Maybe Eddie was just building his own kind of life, one that didn't have room for his mother's worries. But deep down, I knew better. The ache in my chest wasn't confusion. It was warning. When a mother's instincts start whispering, you listen, even if the world tells you you're imagining things. I didn't know it yet, but those small things, the dying roses, the missing mail, the lies hidden in polite smiles, were the first signs of something much bigger. I brushed them off then, telling myself everything was fine. But the ache didn't go away. It grew, and soon it would lead me straight to the truth I wasn't ready to face. It was a Sunday morning in late spring. The air was warm, and the sky was so clear you could see forever. I had just finished baking Eddie's favorite banana bread, the one with crushed pecans, and decided to take it over to his house. It had been too long since I'd seen him, and something inside me told me it was time. When I got there, Stephanie's car wasn't in the driveway. For the first time in months, that felt like a good sign. Maybe I could finally have a quiet visit with my son. I knocked, but no one answered. The front door was slightly open, so I called out, "Eddie, it's Mom." No response, just the faint sound of a television in the background. I stepped inside and found him asleep on the couch. The TV was playing one of those home renovation shows, and the smell of burnt coffee filled the air. He looked exhausted, eyes sunken, face pale. His work laptop was still open beside him, and bills were scattered across the coffee table. I set the banana bread on the counter and started tidying up just like I used to when he was little. I didn't mean to snoop, but that's when I saw it, a manila folder sitting on the counter with a few papers sticking out. The label caught my eye, property transfer agreement. My heart started pounding. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe insurance paperwork or a refinance form. But curiosity got the best of me. I pulled the top page out just enough to read the first line. Transfer of ownership from Edward McConnell to Stephanie Holt McConnell. I froze. I flipped to the last page, and there it was, Eddie's signature, dated 2 weeks earlier. I felt like someone had kicked the air out of me. When I turned back toward the living room, Eddie was awake, blinking, trying to focus. "Mom," he mumbled, "what are you doing here?" I held up the folder. "What is this, Eddie?" He rubbed his eyes, looked at the paper, and sighed. "Oh, that. It's just for taxes. Steph said it's easier that way. To manage deductions or something." I stared at him. "You signed the house over to her?" He sat up, defensive but weary. "Not really. It's just temporary. She's better with paperwork and bills. You know me, I hate dealing with that stuff. I shook my head slowly. Eddie, this isn't a joint document. It says you transferred full ownership to her name. He frowned, but his eyes darted away. Mom, please, don't start. Steph's helping me keep things organized. She wouldn't do anything to hurt me. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't ignore what I'd just read. He'd always trusted too easily. When his father was alive, he left all the money matters to him. Eddie was the type who fixed the pipes and mowed the lawn, not the one who read contracts. After his dad passed, he leaned on me for a while. But when Stephanie came along, that changed. She'd taken that same trust and twisted it into control. I sat down next to him. Honey, you can't just hand over something like this. That house is yours. Your father built it with you. He rubbed his temples. Mom, please, I'm tired. Can we not do this right now? I could hear the frustration in his voice, but underneath it was something else. Fear. I looked at him closely. His hands were trembling slightly, and his face had that empty look people get when they've been living under pressure too long. Eddie, I said gently, have you read this? He hesitated, then said, no. Steph went over it with the lawyer. I just signed where she told me to. That broke me. I reached over and took his hand. Your father always said, never sign what you don't understand. He used to make you read the labels on cereal boxes just so you'd learn to pay attention. He gave a weak smile, but his eyes were wet. Mom, it's fine. She's my wife. I trust her. I squeezed his hand. Trust is good, son, but blind trust is dangerous. Just then, Stephanie's car pulled into the driveway. I could see it through the window, that shiny white SUV she bought last fall. Eddie stood up quickly, slipping the papers back into the folder. Don't tell her you saw that, he whispered. She'll be upset. I looked at him, hurt, upset. For what? For me caring about my own child. Before he could answer, the front door opened and Stephanie walked in. Well, she said, eyes flicking from me to the folder on the counter. Isn't this a surprise? I smiled politely, just dropped off banana bread. She walked over, picked it up, and set it on the fridge like it was clutter. That's thoughtful, she said. We'll have it later. Eddie shifted uncomfortably. Steph, Mom just stopped by. I see that, she interrupted, looking directly at me. Next time, maybe call first. Eddie's been really tired. We're trying to keep things peaceful around here. Her tone was firm, controlled. The kind that sounds polite, but means stay out. I didn't want to start a scene. I just nodded. Of course. I'll be on my way. As I walked past her, I noticed she placed her hand on Eddie's shoulder, not tender, but possessive. He didn't move. When I got outside, the warm air hit my face like a wave. I sat in my car for a few minutes before I could even turn the key. Inside that folder was the truth. My son was losing everything his father built, and he didn't even see it happening. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my husband's old desk, the same one he used to pay bills on. The chair still creaked the same way it did when he leaned back to think. I opened the drawer where he kept all his papers, insurance forms, property deeds, tax receipts. Everything was still in order, just like he left it. I pulled out our original property copy. The one showing the house was a family asset. If Stephanie had filed a transfer, it would mean she was trying to erase me, too. I laid both sets of papers side by side, his signature, her document, and whispered to the empty room, I need help. For the first time in years, I felt small. Not weak, just small, like someone standing at the edge of a storm. Then I remembered a name I hadn't said in 15 years, Daniel Ruiz. Daniel had worked with my husband back in the day, a private investigator who used to handle insurance fraud cases. He was sharp, discreet, and owed my husband a favor or two. I pulled out my phone and stared at the screen. The number was still in my old contacts. When he answered, His voice was rough but familiar. Yolanda McConnell. I never thought I'd hear from you again. Daniel, I said quietly, I need to find out what's going on with my son's wife. He didn't ask for details. Just said, I'll meet you tomorrow. Bring whatever you've got. After I hung up, I sat there in the dark, staring at the papers one last time. My husband had built that house with his hands. Stephanie might have the paperwork, but she didn't have history, and I wasn't about to let her bury it. Tomorrow, I'd find out just how deep this went. And that was the night I stopped hoping things would fix themselves and started fighting back. Daniel and I met the next morning at a small diner off Central Expressway, the kind of place that hasn't changed in 30 years. He walked in wearing the same leather jacket he'd had back when my husband was alive. His hair was grayer, but his eyes hadn't lost their sharpness. He slid into the booth across from me. You look good, Yolanda, he said, studying me, but I can tell something's eating you. It's Stephanie, I said. She's done something with Eddie's house. I saw papers with his signature transferring it into her name. He nodded slowly. You got copies? I handed him the photos I'd taken with my phone. He scanned them, jaw tightening. That's not a tax form. That's a full transfer. If this is recorded with the county, she owns the place. My stomach dropped. So it's real. It's real, he said. The question is, what's her endgame? I told him everything. The dying roses, the missing mail, how Eddie barely looked me in the eye anymore. He listened without interrupting, the way good investigators do. When I finished, he leaned back and said, Give me a week. I'll see what she's really up to. Daniel, I said, I can't afford. He raised a hand. Don't worry about that. Your husband saved my hide once. I'm just paying an old debt. A week later, he called me. His tone was flat. We need to talk. Today. We met again at the diner. He had 2 thick folders with him. I don't sugarcoat, he said, sliding one across the table. This is her financial trail. Inside were printed bank statements and screenshots. Money moving from Eddie's joint account into one in Stephanie's name. Regular transfers, 500 here, 1,000 there, then one big withdrawal of $20,000. She told Eddie she was investing. I murmured. She was, he said grimly, just not for him. The second folder was worse. Texts between her and a realtor in San Antonio. She's been scouting property under her maiden name. And there's an email to a lawyer down there about filing for divorce once the transfer clears. My hands shook. She's planning to leave him. Planning to leave and keep the house, Daniel said. Classic setup. She files first. He looks like the bad guy. She keeps the property. I've seen it 100 times. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The clatter of dishes and low hum of conversation filled the silence. Then Daniel said quietly, You've got 2 paths, Yolanda. I looked up. What do you mean? He held up one finger. The direct path, the ambush. We go straight to a lawyer, file a fraud claim, and take her by surprise in court. It's clean, it's fast, and she won't see it coming. But your son will be blindsided. He'll find out his wife's a liar at the same time everyone else does. He lifted a second finger. Or the mother's path. You tell Eddie first. Sit him down. Show him everything. Give him the chance to confront her himself. But if he tips her off, she'll cover her tracks, move the money, destroy evidence, and make you look like a meddling old woman. I stared at the folders. 2 paths, both leading somewhere painful. Which one would you take? I asked. Daniel smiled faintly. I don't have a son. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the folders spread out in front of me. I read every page, every message, every transfer. Each one was another cut, another proof that the woman my son married saw him as a stepping stone. I made tea but didn't drink it. I walked the house, touched the picture of my husband on the mantel. You'd know what to do, I whispered. You always did. The clock ticked past midnight, then 1. I could still hear Daniel's words, protect his heart or protect his future. How do you choose between the two? If I went straight to court, I'd save his future but break his heart. If I went to him first, I might lose the case. And him. I sat there until the sun began to lighten the sky. Then I said out loud, I have to decide. By morning, I had my answer. It wasn't the safest choice, but it was the only one that felt right to a mother. I would talk to my son. Even if it meant losing everything else, he deserved to hear the truth from me. When Daniel called later to ask what I decided, I told him. He sighed. All right. Just promise me one thing. If she finds out, call me before you do anything else. Don't go toe-to-toe with her alone. I promise, I said. After we hung up, I put the folders in my purse next to my husband's old pocket Bible. I didn't plan on preaching, but sometimes faith is the only armor you have. That afternoon, I drove to the park near Eddie's house. The same park where he used to fly kites with his dad. I texted him, can we talk? Just the two of us. He replied right away, sure, Mom. Everything okay? I didn't answer. Some things can't be explained in a text. I parked under the oak tree, where we used to sit during his Little League games. When he arrived, he looked even thinner than before. His shirt was wrinkled, and he had that worn-out look people get when they're holding too many secrets. Mom, he said, smiling weakly, what's going on? I took a breath and handed him the first folder. I need you to see something. He flipped through the pages, confusion turning to disbelief. Where did you get this? Doesn't matter, I said. It's true. He shook his head. No, Steph wouldn't. This must be... She did, Eddie, I said softly. She's been moving money and planning to sell the house. She's already talked to a lawyer. He closed the folder and stared into the distance. I don't believe it. You don't want to believe it. I said, there's a difference. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then his voice broke. I thought she loved me. I reached over and touched his hand. I know, baby. I thought so too. He stayed quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, what do we do now? We protect you, I said, but you have to let me help. He nodded slowly. Okay, Mom, whatever it takes. That evening, I called Daniel and told him Eddie knew. Then we move fast, he said. She'll file first. Be ready. And she did. 2 days later, Stephanie filed for divorce and property division in Dallas County. But she didn't know yet that I had the originals. For the first time in months, I felt calm. The storm was coming, but at least now I wasn't standing in it alone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked from one room to another, turning off lights I'd already turned off, folding laundry that was already folded. Anything to keep my hands busy. My head was full of Daniel's voice, protect his heart or protect his future. The house was quiet except for the ticking clock in the kitchen. I stopped by the mantel and looked at the framed photo of my husband. It was taken the summer before he passed, him in his work shirt, smiling, his arm around me like he always did. What would you have done? I asked the picture. Would you have told him or kept quiet until she showed her hand? Of course, no answer came. Just the steady tick of that clock and the sound of my own breathing. I sat down at the table where I'd laid the folders out earlier. Every page was proof. Proof that Stephanie had been planning this. Proof that Eddie was being taken advantage of. By sunrise, I knew. It wasn't the safest choice, but it was the only one a mother could make. I was going to tell him. I couldn't let him walk blind into a courtroom, into a trap built by the woman he trusted most. That afternoon, I texted him to meet me at the park near his house. He replied right away, probably thinking I just wanted to talk about the usual, Sunday dinner or something simple. The park was quiet when I got there. It used to be full of life when Eddie was little, him running around with his friends, flying kites with his dad, laughing until the sun went down. Those were the memories that kept me steady as I waited. When Eddie arrived, he looked tired. His shoulders drooped like someone carrying invisible weight. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, Mom," he said, hugging me lightly. "What's going on?" I motioned for him to sit at the picnic table. "We need to talk." He frowned. "That sounds serious." "It is," I said, pulling out the folder Daniel had given me. "And I need you to listen before you get upset." He looked confused. "Mom, what's this?" I opened the folder and slid it toward him. "Just look." He flipped through the papers, bank transfers, text messages, the realtor's name. I could see his face changing with every line he read. Confusion, disbelief, then something close to fear. Finally, he set the papers down. "Where did you get this?" "I have a friend who still knows how to find the truth." I said, "This is Stephanie's doing, Eddie. She's been moving money into her name. She's been talking to lawyers about filing for divorce once the transfer is complete." He shook his head. "No, she wouldn't. Mom, you don't understand her. She's just trying to make things easier for us." I reached across the table, placing my hand on his. "I understand what it looks like when someone is using you. I've seen this before. She's trying to cut you off from everything your father built." He stared at the folder again, his breathing uneven. "You're wrong," he whispered. "You have to be wrong." "Eddie, look at the dates," I said softly. "They line up with when she asked you to sign the house papers. It's all here." He sat back, staring at the trees. "She told me she was helping, that she was fixing things. I thought she knew better than me." His voice cracked on the last word. I squeezed his hand. "She took advantage of your trust. That's not your fault." He didn't answer for a long time. Finally, he whispered, "Mom, what have I done?" I looked at him. My son, the boy who used to fix his bike with his dad in our driveway, who still called me when he couldn't figure out a recipe. He looked lost. "We can fix it," I said, "but we have to move carefully." He nodded slowly. "What do I do?" "First, you don't tell her anything," I said. "Let her think you're still in the dark. Daniel and I will handle the rest." He hesitated. "Mom, if she finds out you're involved." I smiled a little. "Then she'll finally learn who she's dealing with." We left the park quietly. I told him to act normal around her. I could see he was scared, but there was a bit of relief in his eyes too, the kind that comes when someone finally admits the truth to themselves. That night, I called Daniel and told him Eddie knew. "You sure he can handle it?" Daniel asked. "He can," I said firmly. "He just needs a little time." "Then we'd better move fast," he said. "She'll figure it out soon." He was right. 3 days later, Stephanie did exactly what we expected. She filed for divorce first, a classic move to take control of the story. Eddie called me that night, his voice shaking. "Mom," she filed, "I didn't even know until I got served at work." I took a deep breath. "That's okay. We're ready." "I don't want to fight her," he said quietly. "I just want to keep what's mine." "And you will," I said, "but we have to be smart." That evening, I gathered everything, Daniel's evidence, the deed copies, the email records. I even printed my notary credentials from years ago, proof that I understood how property transfers worked. I spread it all across my kitchen table. Every document, every page was part of a puzzle, and I was determined to put it together. For the first time since this mess began, I felt calm. Not happy, not angry, just clear. Stephanie thought she was the smartest person in the room. She believed she could erase years of family work with a few signatures. But she underestimated something, a mother's patience. Patience can look like silence, but it's really preparation. I put the last folder in my bag and looked around my house, the home where Eddie grew up, where his father taught him how to fix a faucet, where laughter used to fill every room. I whispered to myself, "You built all this. You protected it once. Now it's my turn." That night, I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I ironed a simple navy dress and gathered my documents in a leather envelope. I didn't know exactly what would happen in court, but I knew one thing. I'd be ready. Whatever came next, I wouldn't walk in as a victim. I'd walk in as a woman who remembered what her husband taught her. When someone threatens your family, you don't step back. You stand up. The storm was coming, but I wasn't afraid anymore. Because this time, I knew exactly why I was there, and I was ready to prove it. The courthouse in downtown Dallas looked bigger than I remembered. The walls, the marble floors, the echo of shoes clicking, it all carried that heavy air of people trying to prove something. Eddie and I arrived early. He was quiet, holding his briefcase like it was a shield. I could tell he hadn't slept much. Neither had I. But this time, I wasn't nervous. I was ready. We sat in the front row behind his lawyer, a young man named Kent who looked barely out of law school. Across the room, Stephanie sat at her table in a pale blue suit, her hair perfect, nails polished, smile sharp as a blade. When her eyes met mine, she didn't flinch. She gave me a tiny smirk, like she was already celebrating. Her lawyer leaned toward her, whispering something that made her chuckle. I knew that laugh, the one that said, "You can't touch me." The judge entered, and everyone stood. Once we were seated, the courtroom settled into that tense silence where every paper shuffle sounded like thunder. The case was called Stephanie Holt McConnell versus Edward McConnell. The words made my chest tighten. How could it come to this? A mother watching her son sit across from the woman he thought was his forever. Stephanie's lawyer stood first. "Your Honor," he began confidently, "my client legally owns the marital property at question. The deed was voluntarily transferred to her name with her husband's consent and knowledge. We have full documentation to support this." He held up a stack of papers. "These records show consistent and lawful financial transfers, all with Mr. McConnell's approval." The judge nodded, flipping through the exhibits. "Very well. Defense." Kent stood, his voice steady but nervous. "Your Honor, we contend that the property transfer was done under manipulation and false pretense. My client was unaware of the full contents of the document he signed." Stephanie's lawyer smirked. "Regret does not invalidate consent. Counsel." The judge raised a hand. "Let's proceed with evidence." As they went back and forth, I sat silently, hands folded over my purse. I could feel Stephanie's eyes on me. She looked so sure of herself, as if the whole thing was a formality she'd already won. Then came the moment that made my blood boil. Her lawyer held up printed bank statements, conveniently proving that every transfer was for shared expenses, renovations, taxes, and mortgage adjustments. It was all neatly explained. But I knew better. Eddie's lawyer objected, asking for the originals. Stephanie's side claimed they were lost during file migration. The judge sighed, clearly unimpressed, but allowed them to continue. Stephanie leaned back and laughed softly. Not loud, not obvious, just enough that only the first few rows could hear. That small laugh was enough to cut through me. It said, "You tried, old lady, but you're too late." That's when the judge glanced toward me. "Mrs. McConnell," he said, noticing I wasn't on either side's witness list. "Why are you here today?" The courtroom turned toward me. I stood slowly, gripping the leather envelope in my hands. "To make sure the truth isn't left outside, Your Honor." Stephanie's lawyer chuckled under his breath. "Objection, Your Honor. This witness isn't." The judge interrupted. "I'll allow it. Continue, Mrs. McConnell." I stepped forward, calm and clear. I'm Yolanda McConnell, Edward's mother. I was present when my late husband first signed the original property deed for that home 23 years ago. I still have the notarized copy. Stephanie crossed her legs, still smirking. With all due respect, Your Honor, family sentiment doesn't change ownership. I met her eyes. Maybe not, but fraud does. The judge leaned forward slightly. Mrs. McConnell, what do you have there? I placed the envelope on the desk before him. The original signed and notarized property deed. And alongside it, authenticated copies of recent bank statements showing large transfers to accounts under Ms. Holt's maiden name. The ones her lawyer just said were lost. The judge raised an eyebrow. And how did you obtain these? They were sent to my address until Ms. Holt changed the mailing information without my son's consent. I said plainly, every record is dated, and every transfer aligns with when she began consulting divorce attorneys in San Antonio. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even Kent looked stunned. Stephanie's lawyer stammered, Your Honor, these documents can't be verified on the spot. The judge cut him off. We'll see about that. Clerk, please take these into evidence immediately. Stephanie's smile faltered for the first time. She glanced at her lawyer, who looked just as rattled. As the clerk reviewed the documents, the judge flipped through the copies I'd provided. These are legitimate, he said, looking at the seals and dates. Mrs. McConnell, where did you keep these? In a safe at home, I said. My husband taught me to hold on to anything tied to the family property. He always said, paper tells the truth when people won't. The judge gave a small nod. That's wise advice. Stephanie shifted in her chair, her confidence draining away. Her lawyer tried to recover. Even so, Your Honor, the current title still stands in my client's name. That transfer. The judge held up a hand. That transfer appears fraudulent, given what's been presented here. This court will suspend the property claim until we review all evidence. Mrs. Holt McConnell, I suggest you prepare to explain these transfers in full detail. Stephanie's face went red. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Eddie looked at me from the defense table, disbelief mixed with gratitude. The judge looked between us. Mrs. McConnell, I'll need you to stay available for further testimony. I have a feeling we'll need your documentation again. I nodded. Of course, Your Honor. When I turned to walk back to my seat, Stephanie's glare could have burned a hole through me. She leaned toward me as I passed and whispered, You think this is over? I stopped and looked her straight in the eye. No, I think it's just starting. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the judge banged the gavel. We'll reconvene next week after document verification. Until then, all property actions are frozen. That single line changed everything. Outside the courtroom, Eddie hugged me tightly for the first time in months. Mom, I can't believe it. You saved me. I held his face in my hands. No, sweetheart. I just made sure the truth spoke loud enough to be heard. Behind us, Stephanie walked out of the courtroom with her lawyer, no laughter left in her. For the first time, she didn't look sure of herself. And as I watched her go, I knew this wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about taking back what she thought she could steal, our family's dignity. The next hearing came faster than I expected. Word had spread around the courthouse after that first day. People whispered when they saw us walk in. Some looked curious, others sympathetic. Everyone could sense there was more coming. Eddie looked stronger this time. He'd shaved, wore a clean suit, and held his head up. I sat behind him just like before. Across the aisle, Stephanie was back in her blue suit, though this time her confidence had a crack in it. Her lawyer looked tired, like a man who'd spent the week trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed. The judge entered, and everyone stood. Once seated, he spoke right away. We've reviewed the documents provided by Mrs. McConnell. They check out. The signatures, dates, and bank transfers are all verified. But there's a new piece of evidence submitted this morning by the defense. Stephanie's lawyer frowned. New evidence? We weren't informed. The judge turned to him. That's because it was handed to my clerk 30 minutes ago by a Mr. Daniel Ruiz. I could feel my heart skip. Daniel had promised me one last surprise, but he hadn't told me what it was. The judge continued. This evidence includes an audio file recorded legally under Texas consent laws. It appears to contain a phone conversation involving Mrs. Holt McConnell. Stephanie's face drained of color. Her lawyer shot up. Your Honor, we object to the use of any private recordings not previously disclosed. The judge waved his hand. We'll determine admissibility after hearing it. He pressed a small button on his laptop, and the courtroom went silent. A woman's voice came through the speakers. Cold, familiar, unmistakable. Stephanie's. He's clueless, she said, laughing softly. Once the old woman's out of the picture, it's all mine. The house, the accounts, everything. Eddie won't even know what hit him. The courtroom froze. Then another voice, her friend maybe, asked, what if his mom finds out? Stephanie laughed again. She's harmless. Always was. All she's got is her banana bread and her big heart. She won't lift a finger. I felt Eddie stiffen in front of me. The recording went on, Stephanie talking about cleaning out accounts, calling Eddie too trusting, and saying she was already in talks with a realtor. When it ended, the judge didn't say a word for a long time. He just looked down at the papers in front of him. Stephanie finally broke the silence. That recording is edited. It's taken out of context. The judge raised his eyes. Is that your voice, Mrs. Holt McConnell? She hesitated. I don't recall that exact conversation. Then why? The judge said slowly. Do the timestamps on your emails match the recording's date, right down to the minute? Her lawyer tried to speak, but the judge stopped him with a look. I've heard enough. Eddie stood up suddenly, hands trembling. He turned toward Stephanie, his voice shaking but clear. You used me. She looked up at him, still trying to hold her composure. Eddie, you're overreacting. I was venting to a friend. Vent, he said, almost shouting. You called my mother the old woman. You planned to take my house, my savings, and walk away like none of it mattered. You made me turn on the one person who's always been there for me. Stephanie's lawyer tried to calm her, whispering something, but she pushed his hand away. You don't understand. Eddie, I was doing it for us. For our future. He shook his head slowly. No, you were doing it for yourself. The judge cleared his throat. That's enough. Let the court state for the record. The evidence shows clear intent to commit fraud and misrepresentation. All property transfers executed under false pretense are hereby voided. Ownership reverts to Mr. Edward McConnell. Stephanie's mouth fell open. You can't do that. It's my house, too. The judge's voice was calm but firm. You made it your house by deception. And now it's being undone the same way, by proof. He turned to Eddie. Mr. McConnell, you may file for recovery of any lost funds. This court will also refer Mrs. Holt McConnell to the district attorney's office for review of potential financial fraud. The courtroom was completely silent. Then someone in the back whispered, Good for him. Another person nodded. Stephanie stood up so fast her chair tipped over. She grabbed her purse, muttering under her breath. Her lawyer tried to stop her, but she yanked her arm free and stormed out, the echo of her heels hitting the floor like gunfire. Eddie didn't move for a while. When he finally turned around, his eyes found mine. Mom, he said softly, I'm sorry. I shook my head. You have nothing to be sorry for. You just needed to see what was real. He walked over and hugged me right there in front of everyone. The kind of hug that said, thank you for not giving up on me. The judge smiled faintly, then said, "This court appreciates Mrs. McConnell's contribution to the truth. Case adjourned." The gavel came down, and it was over. People began to stand, gathering their things, whispering to one another. Some even smiled at me as they walked past, small nods of respect from strangers who just watched a mother fight for her son. Daniel met me outside the courtroom, his hands in his pockets, that small grin on his face. "Not bad for a day's work," he said. I laughed softly. "You did more than enough." He shook his head. "No, Yolanda, you did. I just turned on the tape. You're the one who stood up." I looked out at the busy Dallas street, cars rushing by like nothing had happened inside that courtroom. Life went on, but for us, everything had changed. Eddie came out a few minutes later, walking a little lighter than before. "You going home, Mom?" "Yes," I said, smiling. "I think it's time." We walked together to the parking lot, the air warm and still. When I got into my car, I sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. I didn't feel joy or victory, just a deep, steady peace, because the truth had finally done the talking, and it had spoken louder than any lie ever could. I thought about the judge's question from that first day. "Mrs. McConnell, why are you here?" Now, I finally had the answer. "I was there," I whispered, because when someone tries to rewrite your family's story, you don't let them hold the pen. Then I drove home, back to the house my husband built, the house my son could still call his own. And for the first time in a long time, everything felt right again. But let me ask you this. If you were in my shoes, holding that recording in your hands, would you have stayed quiet and let the court find out on its own? Or would you have pressed play, even if it meant breaking your son's heart to save him? Outside the courthouse, the Texas sun was bright and unbothered, like the world didn't even know a battle had just ended inside those walls. Eddie stood next to me, quiet for a moment, then turned and pulled me into a hug. It wasn't one of those polite hugs. It was tight, long, the kind that said thank you and I'm sorry all at once. His voice cracked when he whispered, "Mom, I should have believed you from the start." I smiled, resting my hand on his shoulder. "You did when it mattered." He nodded, his eyes still red. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't shown up." "You would have found your way," I said softly. "I just helped you see the road." For the first time in months, he laughed, a real one, the kind I hadn't heard since before Stephanie came along. It was the sound of relief, of something broken slowly putting itself back together. We walked to our cars, and before he drove off, he rolled down the window and said, "Come by Sunday. I'll cook this time." That made me chuckle. "Just don't burn the chicken like last time." He grinned, shaking his head. No promises. After he left, I sat in my car for a long while, just breathing. The courthouse behind me, the open road ahead, both symbols of something finished and something new. Weeks passed. The court's decision held firm, and Stephanie didn't bother appealing. She packed up and left Dallas, moving out quietly, without a word to anyone. Eddie kept the house. He repainted the porch, fixed the steps, and even planted new roses where the old ones had died. When I came by one Sunday afternoon, the smell of barbecue filled the air. He stood at the grill, tongs in hand, looking peaceful. "Guess who's learning from YouTube now?" he said proudly. I laughed. "Well, if YouTube can teach you to cook, maybe it's finally good for something." That day we ate together, just the two of us, like the old days. No tension, no careful words, just family. When I got home that evening, I walked into my backyard and saw something I hadn't noticed in a long time, the first blooms of my late husband's roses. They were soft pink, healthy again. I knelt down beside them, brushing the petals gently. "You'd be proud of him," I whispered. He finally stood up for himself. A few days later, Daniel stopped by. He looked the same, worn jacket, calm eyes. that easy smile that said he'd seen too much but still believed in doing right. He handed me a sealed folder. "Final copies," he said. "Case closed." I took it, but before he turned to go, I asked, "You sure that's everything?" "Everything that matters," he said. "You sure you're done with detective work?" I smiled. "Oh, I'm done fighting, but I'll never stop paying attention." He chuckled. "Good answer." After he left, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the folder still unopened beside me. I didn't need to look inside. I already knew how the story ended. Eddie visited more often after that. We started Sunday dinners again, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, sometimes banana bread for dessert. He'd help me in the kitchen, asking about his dad's old recipes, wanting to learn what he'd once ignored. Life settled back into something gentle, not perfect, but peaceful. Sometimes late at night, I'd think back to that moment in court when the judge asked, "Mrs. McConnell, why are you here?" I hadn't known how to answer then, but now I do. When I walked into that courtroom, I wasn't there for revenge. I was there for respect. For every mother who's ever been told, stay out of grown folks' business. For every woman who's been made to feel small in her own story. Because sometimes silence costs too much. And when someone tries to rewrite your family's story, you don't stay quiet. You pick up the pen and write it back in your own handwriting. So, I stayed quiet for a long time. But when I finally spoke, the truth spoke louder. And it was enough. Eddie is doing better now. He started a small IT business from home, and the sparkle's back in his eyes. Sometimes he still apologizes, but I always tell him the same thing. You learn the hard way, son. That's how lessons stick. As for me, I take my mornings slow, water the roses, and sit on the porch with a cup of coffee. I watch the neighborhood kids ride their bikes down the same street where Eddie once did. Life has a way of circling back, doesn't it? Now, when people ask how I managed to face it all, I just smile and say, by remembering who I am and who I raised. Because at the end of the day, that's what this story was about. Not winning a case, not proving someone wrong, but standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. Before I go, I'll leave you with one question, and I'd like you to really think about it. When I had all the proof in my hands, I had to decide. Confront my son directly and risk losing everything, or wait for the courtroom and let the truth do the talking. I made my choice, but I still wonder, if you were in my shoes, which path would you have taken and why? Don't forget to download this wonderful book called 38 Uplifting and Funny Short Stories for Seniors. Easy to read tales that bring laughter, memories, and mental stimulation. It's full of heartwarming, simple stories written to bring a smile, stir up memories, and remind us that joy doesn't fade with age. It grows stronger. You'll find it in the pinned comment below. Now, if you like this story, go ahead and click on the next video appearing on your screen, because in it is a story of betrayal and revolt like you've never seen before, right here on her Kindle Stories. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because every story we tell here reminds us that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just shows up and says, "I'm here."